The year was 1910. Brazil, a young republic still grappling with the ghosts of its colonial past, found itself on the precipice of change. On the evening of November 22nd, a tremor of discontent, years in the making, would erupt within the seemingly impenetrable walls of the Brazilian Navy. This was the Revolta da Chibata, a mutiny as startling as it was inevitable, a desperate cry for justice from the bowels of the mighty battleships that patrolled Brazil's shores. For centuries, the Brazilian Navy had borne the weight of a cruel and archaic practice, corporal punishment. The Chibata, a heavy leather whip, was more than just an instrument of discipline. It was a symbol of oppression, a brutal reminder of a social hierarchy that relegated black and mixed-race sailors to the bottom rung. The revolt, sparked by the lash but fueled by years of accumulated grievances, would expose the deep racial and social fissures that ran through Brazilian society. The Revolta da Chibata was not merely a mutiny against inhumane working conditions. It was a cry for dignity, a demand for recognition, a rebellion against a system that had for too long ignored the voices of the marginalized. The rebellion, though short-lived, would leave an indelible mark on Brazil's history. It would force the nation to confront the ugly realities of its past and light a fire for social justice that would continue to burn for generations to come. To understand the Revolta da Chibata, one must first delve into the belly of the beast, into the dark heart of the Brazilian Navy at the turn of the 20th century. The Navy, ostensibly a symbol of national pride and might, was in reality a microcosm of the deep-seated inequalities that plagued Brazilian society. It was a world where discipline was enforced with brutal efficiency, where the Chibata reigned supreme. The Chibata, a heavy, multi-tailed whip, was a relic of Brazil's colonial past, a tool used to maintain order and exert control over a largely black and mixed-race labor force. Floggings, often numbering in the hundreds, were meted out for even the slightest infractions, leaving sailors scarred, broken, and utterly dehumanized. The punishment was more than just physical. It was a form of psychological torture designed to instill fear and obedience. But the brutality of the lash was only one facet of the sailors' discontent. The Navy was a breeding ground for resentment, a pressure cooker of simmering anger. The vast majority of sailors were Afro-Brazilians, often recruited from the poorest segments of society. They endured deplorable living conditions, meager rations, and rampant disease. Their white counterparts, meanwhile, enjoyed preferential treatment, highlighting the stark racial divide that permeated every aspect of naval life. Adding fuel to the fire was the recent acquisition of two powerful dreadnought battleships, the Minas Gerais and the São Paulo. These symbols of modernity stood in stark contrast to the archaic and inhumane treatment of the very men who operated them. The sailors, exposed to the more humane conditions and the absence of corporal punishment in foreign navies, began to question the injustices they faced at home. The stage was set for rebellion. From the ranks of the oppressed emerged figures of extraordinary courage and conviction, men who dared to challenge the status quo and demand a better future for themselves and their fellow sailors. At the forefront of this burgeoning movement was João Cândido Felisberto, a name that would forever be etched in the annals of Brazilian history as the leader of the Revolta da Chibata. João Cândido, a skilled sailor and a natural leader, had witnessed firsthand the brutality and injustice that permeated the Brazilian Navy. Having endured the lash himself, he understood the depths of humiliation and pain it inflicted. But Cândido was more than just a victim. He was a visionary, a man who dared to dream of a different reality for himself and his fellow sailors. Alongside Cândido stood other figures who played pivotal roles in the uprising. Francisco Dias Martins, known as Mão Negra, Black Hand, was instrumental in drafting the initial ultimatum presented to the government. Adalberto Ferreira Ribas, a man of considerable intellect, is believed to have authored the eloquent manifesto that articulated the sailors' grievances and demands. These men, united by their shared experiences and driven by a thirst for justice, became the architects of rebellion. The leaders of the Revolta da Chibata were not driven by blind rage or a thirst for vengeance. They were motivated by a deep sense of injustice and a desire for a better future. They understood the risks they were taking, the potential consequences of their actions. Yet, they chose to act, to raise their voices against oppression, knowing that silence was no longer an option. The night of November 22nd, 1910, descended upon Rio de Janeiro like any other, the city's vibrant energy masking a simmering tension that crackled in the humid air. Unbeknownst to the city's unsuspecting populace, a storm was brewing, a maelstrom of discontent ready to be unleashed. As darkness enveloped the harbor, a group of sailors aboard the mighty battleship Minas Gerais gathered in hushed whispers, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of oil lamps. The time for talk, for petitions and pleas, was over. The moment for action had arrived. The revolt began with a whisper, a ripple of defiance that quickly spread through the Minas Gerais like wildfire. Sailors, armed with a potent mix of desperation and determination, seized control of the ship, their movements swift and precise. The sleeping officers, caught off guard, were quickly subdued, their authority stripped away as easily as their uniforms. News of the uprising spread like a virus, jumping from ship to ship, igniting a chain reaction that would engulf the entire Brazilian Navy. The sound of gunfire shattered the night, a thunderous roar that echoed across the city, shaking its inhabitants from their slumber. The sailors, their patience exhausted, aimed their guns not at the city or its people, but at symbols of the oppressive power they had endured for far too long. Government buildings and military installations were bombarded, a symbolic strike designed to send a clear message. The Brazilian Navy, once a bastion of unquestioned authority, was now in the hands of the revolting sailors. The revolt, meticulously planned and swiftly executed, sent shockwaves through the nation. The government, caught off guard by the scale and audacity of the uprising, struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the situation. The sailors, once dismissed as mere cogs in the naval machine, had found their voice, and it was a voice that would not be silenced. Section 5. A city on edge, Rio de Janeiro in the grip of rebellion. The days following the initial outbreak of the Revolta da Chibata were a time of great uncertainty and anxiety for the citizens of Rio de Janeiro. The city, accustomed to the comforting rhythms of daily life, found itself thrust into chaos and confusion. News of the revolt spread like wildfire, fueled by rumor and speculation. Fear gripped the hearts of the elite, who had much to lose should the social order be irrevocably disrupted. The streets, normally bustling with activity, were eerily deserted as residents barricaded themselves indoors, peering nervously from behind shuttered windows. The government, initially paralyzed by indecision, struggled to formulate a response to the unprecedented crisis. The president, Marshal Hermes da Fonseca, a career military man, was torn between his instinct to crush the rebellion with brute force and the realization that such a move could plunge the nation into a bloody civil war. Meanwhile, the rebel sailors, firmly in control of the formidable warships that controlled the bay, presented their demands in the form of a carefully worded ultimatum. The ultimatum, a testament to the sailors' courage and clarity of purpose, was a powerful indictment of the injustices they had long endured. It demanded an immediate end to the barbaric practice of corporal punishment, improved living conditions, and amnesty for all those who had participated in the revolt. The demands, though radical in their implications, were not unreasonable. They reflected a deep-seated longing for dignity, respect, and basic human rights. The city held its breath, caught in a precarious limbo between fear and anticipation. The fate of Rio de Janeiro, and indeed of Brazil itself, hung in the balance as the government grappled with the sailors' demands. The Revolta da Chibata had exposed the fragility of the social fabric, revealing the deep fissures that ran through Brazilian society. Section 6. The Price of Peace. Negotiating a fragile truce. As Rio de Janeiro teetered on the brink, a tense drama unfolded in the halls of power. The government, acutely aware of the devastating consequences of a protracted conflict, realized that a peaceful resolution was the only viable option. The sailors, though victorious in their initial seizure of the fleet, understood the limitations of their position. They were not revolutionaries intent on overthrowing the government. Their aim was more focused, to secure basic rights and dignity for themselves and their fellow seamen. Enter José Carlos de Carvalho, a young congressman known for his eloquence and his unwavering commitment to social justice. Tasked with the perilous mission of mediating between the government and the mutineers, Carvalho became the linchpin in the delicate negotiations that followed. He recognized the legitimacy of the sailors' grievances and understood the need for a swift and equitable resolution. The negotiations were fraught with tension and mistrust. The government, wary of appearing weak, sought to minimize concessions while ensuring the loyalty of the armed forces. The sailors, hardened by years of mistreatment and suspicious of empty promises, demanded concrete guarantees. Carvalho, navigating this treacherous terrain with remarkable skill and sensitivity, managed to bridge the chasm between the two sides. After days of intense discussions, an agreement was reached. The government, recognizing the untenable nature of its position, agreed to abolish the abhorrent practice of corporal punishment within the Brazilian Navy. Promises were made to improve living conditions and address the sailors' most pressing concerns. In return, the mutineers agreed to relinquish control of the fleet and stand down. A fragile truce had been reached, but the road ahead was uncertain, fraught with the potential for renewed conflict. Section 7. Echoes of the Revolt. Immediate consequences and repression. The immediate aftermath of the Revolta da Chibata was a time of both hope and trepidation. The abolition of corporal punishment, a victory hard won by the sailors' courage and sacrifice, sent ripples of shock and celebration through Brazilian society. The Chibata, for so long a symbol of oppression and brutality, had been vanquished. Yet the specter of retribution loomed large, a dark cloud hanging over the fragile peace. The government, though forced to concede to the sailors' demands, remained deeply apprehensive of the potential for further unrest. The specter of mutiny, of the lower classes challenging the established order, was a nightmare that haunted the ruling elite. And so began a campaign of repression, swift and brutal, designed to punish the perceived insubordination and quell any lingering dissent. Despite the promises of amnesty, hundreds of sailors were rounded up, imprisoned, and subjected to inhumane treatment. Many were shipped off to remote rubber plantations in the Amazon, condemned to a slow and agonizing death in the unforgiving jungle. Others faced summary executions, their lives extinguished without trial or mercy. João Quindido himself, hailed as a hero by some, was declared insane and confined to a mental institution, a cruel attempt to discredit and silence him. The government's betrayal of its promises revealed the deep-seated fear and insecurity that underpinned the existing power structure. The Revolta da Chibata had exposed the vulnerability of the elite and the potential for the oppressed to rise up against their oppressors. The brutal repression that followed was a desperate attempt to reassert control, to restore the status quo, and to bury the memory of the rebellion. Section 8. Seeds of Change, Long-Term Impacts and the Fight for Justice. While the immediate aftermath of the Revolta da Chibata was marked by repression and a return to the old order, the seeds of change had been sown. The revolt, however brief and brutally suppressed, had shaken the foundations of Brazilian society, exposing the deep-seated inequalities and the simmering discontent that simmered beneath the surface. The most significant consequence of the revolt was the abolition of corporal punishment in the Brazilian Navy. This barbaric practice, a relic of the colonial era, was finally consigned to the dustbin of history. The revolt also led to some improvements in the living conditions aboard ships, albeit limited and slow in their implementation. The government, wary of further unrest, began to pay greater attention to the welfare of its sailors, recognizing that a content and well-treated crew was essential for maintaining naval discipline and effectiveness. But the impact of the Revolta da Chibata extended far beyond the confines of the Navy. The revolt, widely reported in the press, ignited a national debate about racial inequality, social justice, and the rights of the working class. Black Brazilians, inspired by the courage and determination of the sailors, began to organize and demand an end to discrimination and prejudice. The revolt served as a catalyst for the nascent civil rights movement, breathing life into the struggle for equality and justice that would continue for decades to come. The legacy of the Revolta da Chibata is complex and multifaceted. It serves as a stark reminder of the brutality and injustice that have often characterized Brazilian history, but it also stands as a testament to the power of resistance, the courage of ordinary people who dare to stand up against oppression, and the enduring human spirit that refuses to be silenced. Section 9. A lasting legacy. Remembrance and reflection. The Revolta da Chibata, though now a distant echo in the annals of history, continues to resonate with Brazilians today. This pivotal event, marked by both tragedy and triumph, serves as a potent symbol of the ongoing struggle for social justice and racial equality in a nation still grappling with the legacy of its colonial past. In recent years, there has been a growing movement to re-examine and reinterpret the legacy of the revolt and its leaders. João Candido, once demonized as a mutineer, is increasingly recognized as a national hero, a man who dared to challenge the status quo and demand dignity for himself and his fellow sailors. The Brazilian government, acknowledging the injustices of the past, formally pardoned Candido in 2008, a symbolic gesture that aimed to rectify a historical wrong. The Revolta da Chibata also serves as a valuable point of comparison with other resistance movements in Brazil and beyond. The revolt shares similarities with other uprisings against oppression, such as the Canudos War, a conflict that pitted marginalized communities against the might of the Brazilian state. Examining these movements in tandem allows for a deeper understanding of the root causes of social unrest and the ongoing struggle for justice and equality. The Revolta da Chibata, a testament to the indomitable spirit of those who dared to challenge the status quo, continues to inspire generations of Brazilians. It is a reminder that the fight for a more just and equitable society is an ongoing process, a journey that requires constant vigilance, unwavering courage, and a commitment to honoring the sacrifices of those who came before us. The echoes of those fateful days in 1910, when the sound of gunfire shattered the peace and the Brazilian flag was hoisted in the name of justice, remind us that the pursuit of a more perfect union is a noble and necessary endeavor.